This is my most vulnerable podcast to date. I'm sharing through lots of tears how I had an absolute meltdown right before my driving exam. In a moment where I needed to be my strongest, I was at my weakest. Childhood trauma resurfaced unexpectedly and it hit me hard. Honestly, I almost didn't publish this. There are a lot of tears in this episode, and I worried it might come across as trauma dumping. But then I caught myself. Other people's judgment are theirs to hold, not mine. This podcast is all about authenticity and vulnerability, and that what I'm sharing is my truth. So I decided to go ahead and publish this podcast episode. Caveat: if you are not in the space to hear something deeply emotional or to listen to someone cry more than just once, this might not be the episode for you. But if you want to hear how I process trauma in real time, not as a polished success story, but as something still raw and unfolding, then you're welcome. This isn't about being overwhelmed or lost in pain. It is about being present with whatever trauma we carry from childhood. Healing isn't always tied up in a neat little bow. Sometimes it's messy, unfinished, and ongoing. So with that, I invite you into my world, and I hope you get something out of this episode, because even through the tears, I sure did. Without further ado, let's get into it. Okay, my love, let's go into personal storytelling today that I haven't done in a while, and I feel like I want to share way more of my behind the scenes, because that is also what I crave a lot when I listen to people's podcasts. And I love listening to podcasts where they share a lot of personal anecdotes while I'm doing my household chores, and it always feels so really like freeing to listen how other people navigate challenges, what kind of challenges they have. So I thought I'll share something with you that happened a week ago where a trauma came up for me that I didn't know was still in me, and it hasn't shown up in 22 years. Okay, let's dive into it. So I'll give you a lot of context, so bear with me. I am now celebrating almost my 4 year of being in the United States, also as a legal immigrant, and I have not done my driver license in a very long time. So I did my legal driver license back in Austria when I was about to turn 18. That's where in Austria you are eligible to do your driver license, to make a driver license, to do a driver license, but I think, apply for a driver license, maybe a better word. And you can also do, I think in Austria, apply for a driver license and start driving when you're 16, but then it's around, your parents are guarding you. The parents are accompanying you. You have to drive a couple of thousand kilometers, I think. So there are specific requirements. And then as soon as you turn 17 and you have done a lot of requirements that you don't have to do when you are 18 and applying for driver license, then you're able to actually drive. Most of the kids, though, drive or start with a driver license once they hit the legal adult age of 18, where you are able to do a lot of more things than just driving. And so I had my driver license basically for 22 years, I'd say, like 21 years. And I had a car right after. So one of my ex-boyfriends back then got a new car from his dad, and my ex-boyfriend kind of gifted me his old car. So we exchanged it for a symbolic €1, which is less than $1. But it was also a 323F Mazda built in 91. So it was an old beaten down car. But for me, it was a little bit like a Ferrari, because it was a very low laying car, and it was red, and it had like those lights that pop up, from kind of from in front, basically from the carrosserie of the car. I don't know if carrosserie is an English word, but it doesn't matter. So I was super proud of this car. It was amazing. Back then I was smoking like a chimney, so I was smoking the car, and it had a CD player, like that has been such a long time, and I was super proud of this car, and it was my own car, which was great because once you have a driver license but you don't have a car, it basically it doesn't really feel like you have any freedom at all because you always depend on asking your parents for a car, and mine were not always, first of all, they needed their own car. And then my mom also didn't want me to take the car for all those small errands, meeting friends here and there, So once I got that car pretty right after I had my driver license, then I was mobile. And from there on, I always had a car. So I paid for my own car. So I paid for my own insurance. I always worked in summer. So I have never been really subsidized by my parents. They never bought me a car. But I did get help once my old Mazda was, too old and the repair would take too much money. Then they helped me a bit with my next car. And so I always had a car. I was always mobile. I was one of the few people that had a car and had a lot of freedom to go to festivals, travel across Europe with the car, and it was just so much fun. Yeah, so that is my story. And in the end, before I moved to the United States, I had a company car for 3 years. So I drove a very fancy BMW. And so I always enjoyed the freedom of having my own car. And then I moved to the States. And the first year that I arrived here, I came on a fiancé visa. My husband and I married, and then we turned the fiancé visa into. So when you have a fiancé visa, you have 3 months when you come to the United States to marry. It's really very strict here because it's also like you really have. If you pass the 3 months deadline, you have to reapply for certain things, and it's a really big hassle. And mind you, when I moved to the States, it was 2022, which was in the midst of the pandemic. So it was big sucky because, my whole visa was delayed. So we waited for my visa for 2.5 years. We had to sue the United States for me even to come because it took forever. We had high lawyer fees to pay, but it paid off because in the end of the day, that speed up the process, which also means, unfortunately, if you have the money, you have really a lot of more rights because, United States is very capitalistic. And when you have the money and you can pay to speed up things, then obviously that's in your favor. So, and then it took a year for my fiancé visa to turn into a green card. And while I was waiting for my green card, which is just basically looks like a US driver license, and also most of the European driver license are now in this small little format. It looks like a credit card or ATM card. I was not able to work for an entire year. So I had savings, obviously, from my previous job. My husband was working as well, but it's really tough on a household. We lived back then in Boston, which is one of the most expensive cities in the US. It's always, fighting first rank among New York and San Francisco. So Boston, New York, and San Francisco are the most expensive cities out there. So and you can imagine my husband started his residency back in Boston as a neurologist. So he was in training, he was a medical doctor, but in training to become a neurologist. And then Boston is super expensive. His salary wasn't like what you think a doctor's salary is, by far not. And then I wasn't able to work at all. I mean, I did my coaching on the side because I really didn't want to give up the chance of building my business. But not being able to have an income or apply for a job was a very tough spot to be in. And then, and then after a year, I got my work permit, my green card, and then obviously I, applied for a job, got a job, and, my job is 100% working from home. I work for a biotech company here in the US in consulting, so I work absolutely 100% from home. So because I'm working from home, there was never a need for us to have a second car. The first two apartments where we lived in Boston, we also didn't need a car because the supermarkets were like within 10 minutes walk. The bus system or the public transport in Boston, and that's not across the US, but Boston is really well connected when it comes to buses, subways. So that was a lot of fun because there was always, for me, the mobility. When you have ever been to, for example, Vienna has one of the best public transportation systems in the world. I absolutely adore it. It's also super cheap, but same happens to be in Boston when we lived there. So we lived actually in Cambridge next to the University of Harvard and MIT, which meant that we had a lot of like buses going across the city, bringing us to the best subway stations to connect and transfer. So this was really great. So we didn't need a second car because honestly, in the US, not having a second car depends, of course, where you live, but this is actually you being a unicorn. Every household has minimum of 2 cars. And as soon as children get 16 or 17, even they get another car. I have neighbors where their kids have cars. So that's not very rare. It's not a rare sight to see 16-year-olds getting a car. Not to say that this is across the United States, because again, I live in a bubble. I live in a very wealthy and rich area, and that's just what I see. I know in other areas, there might even be people that are, I see that when we go to poorer areas where there are buses and there are people waiting for buses. So that is a very unfortunate sight because not every household, obviously, in the United States has 2 cars. There are also people that have to use public transport because they cannot afford cars. So just want to correct myself here a little bit. Because when I say US, I do generalize, but actually I generalize in my own bubble. And the US has a huge gap between poor and rich. I've never seen such a extreme gap. But yeah, that's a story for another day. And so we never needed a second car. And because of this, I also didn't feel the motivation to get a driver license. And a driver license in the US is actually a good thing because it's the one and only and most, favored ID in the US. No one shows their passports except if you're an expat and you don't have a driver license. And my green card was expiring after a year, and then I had to apply for the unconditional, also removal of conditions green card, blah, blah, blah. It's a boring process to explain to you, but a green card is also a government ID. It's something it's not from the state itself. So basically a lot of people, they don't like green cards. They accept it because it's a picture of you, the birth date and everything, but the one ID that everyone accepts and knows is a driver license because most of the people have a driver license. So it was always tricky if I wanted to open a bank account because I always had to, I never could provide just one ID. I had to provide my green card. And because it was expired and the whole green card process is so slow, I had to provide other documents to show that my green card is not expired, but it's just like basically expired on the card, but legally my green card is not expired. It's just the process takes longer for a renewed card. So having that said, I told my husband as well that since Boston has mad drivers, I always call them mass holes because Massachusetts has one of the worst drivers. Also, New York City is absolutely nuts to drive. It's absolutely a nightmare in that jungle, but I always told my husband, I don't want to apply for a driver license in Boston because driving there is nuts and bananas. And he confirmed. He said, yeah, it's crazy. And they are also well known on the East Coast to be really assholes when it comes to driving. So I told him, okay, our plan was to come to California one day. So I will do my driver license in California because people here are way more chill and so much better than on the East Coast in New England. And then, at some point we manifested our dreams. We came back to California. That's where I also moved to for the first 2 months. We came back to Newport Beach. It's a very wealthy coastal town. A small little town. It's beautiful. It's a beach town. It's adorable. And then obviously at some point I knew I could not procrastinate longer on my driver license. So I applied for my driver license. And the thing with my driver license was just like the whole reason I procrastinated is I was really afraid of driving in the US. The rules are different. The driving style is different. There are a lot of people who I feel like cannot really drive well, and it's more chaotic. That is how I felt about it, especially being a passenger. And the problem is always that when you're driving, it's different than when you're sitting, next to the driver. So I forgot about that principle because I also knew in Austria when like my husband was driving, I always almost got a heart attack the way how he drove, even though he's a very safe driver. But from the perspective of a passenger, when you want, that person to brake sooner than uh, sooner as they normally would, it's a whole thing. I think you can relate to this as well, maybe not, but I've always been a bit more of a nervous person being a passenger, especially because I've been driving since so many years and always been the one driving. Okay, back to the US. So fast forward, I applied for a driver license. In October, I started to study the theory, and then I did the theoretical exam, so the writing exam. And I did that secretly because I didn't want to tell anyone, and I passed first round, so I was really, really happy. But that was just one of the smallest steps. The biggest step was the practical exam. So the theory I knew, even like, you can do that from the safety of your home. So that also felt really good. I mean, there is some precautions that, or requirements so that you cannot cheat, so this is all in a controlled environment with a camera on. So it's not something that you can cheat and look up answers to questions, but it's still, you don't have to go anywhere. I did it from my own private laptop at home. I was very nervous, I have to admit, because I was so ambitious. I've never been ambitious in school. I failed a lot of exams. I was one of the worst students because I didn't give a darn about school and all those subjects. I was a bit more of a rebel, but now today I'm like more ambitious when it comes to those things. And I really, just for my own sake and the way how I value myself, I just didn't want to disappoint myself and fail at the theory exam. Even though I would have not even though I told myself I wouldn't need to tell anyone if I failed, while I knew that I would share that at least with my email list, with you on a podcast, and obviously on Instagram story too, because, why not admitting that you failed? Who cares? But I always have this internal pressure of having to have that, to achieve something on the first attempt. So then when I managed the theory or the written exam, I was able to now apply for I was able actually to get this permission to drive now on the roads to practice. So, but always with someone who has a legal driver license. In my case, obviously, my beautiful husband. Let me just take a big sip of coffee. So whenever we had time, or whenever he had time, we took our Tesla for a ride and I practiced driving. I never drove a Tesla before, so this was also a huge difference from a stick shift fucking gear car, from a BMW to a Tesla who is almost like driving itself, and it's fully automatic. So that for me was like, oh my God, what a change, I mean, the Tesla really drives itself. I don't like the full driving mode. I don't think it's that flawless. I don't trust that computer to drive me around. I still want to have control over the way how I drive, but it helps you with everything. I don't know if you have ever been in a Tesla, but it has a huge screen and it shows you just everything, and it is so easy, to actually handle the whole, system of the car and the driving, and I just love it. So I told him I need not really to practice like driving, because I mean, I've been steering a wheel for many, many years. Now that it's a fully automatic one, I don't even have to practice shifting the gear, which definitely has been a challenge when I started driving when I was 18 years old. But the thing that I wanted to practice is like, traffic and how I go about there are so many differences to Austria and how people drive in Europe and to the rules in Europe, because I think I drove in every country in the in Europe, except for UK, which is totally fucked up that you drive on the left side. Never understood how this is actually possible, that this is happen, that like people drive on the left side. But anyway, so I know that some countries have different rules, but in fact Europe is very similar, if not almost the same, like all the countries. But in the US, there is like 4 stops, 3 stops, 2 stops, and everything has a different rule. And sometimes you have to navigate 4 lanes, 5 lanes, 6 lanes in one direction. And oh my God, there's so much to tell you. Motorway also, like, drive on 7 lanes, and then, always make sure that you are as close as to the exit line way before, because, you're afraid of missing the exit line if you are too much on the left side. And it's just it's just different. So I wanted just to gain a bit of more confidence driving here as the driver. So, well, we practiced for a couple of weeks. And then a week ago, I had my driving exam. And alone, how this came about has just been crazy. Because in January, I told my husband, hey, when do you have time? Because he needs to be present. He needs to bring me there with the car, because if you do your own driving test exam, you have to bring your own car. I mean, you can rent a car at a driving school, but that costs like money that is unnecessary if you have your own car. So I had to make sure my husband's schedule is free enough so that he can come with me. He's not allowed to be in a car when I'm driving with the instructor, or the examiner, but he needs to be present to bring me there with the car. And so in January, I booked in the appointment for March, and that was the best slot for my husband's schedule, so beginning of March. And so I had 4 weeks before I really had the exam, and I thought, like, oh cool, I can kind of like have that in 4 weeks, still a lot of time. So that actually really helped my nerves too, because I was really freaking out about this stupid driving exam. And it made me really nervous. And this was the same nervousness, if not stronger, than I had for my theory test. And this time it was harder for me, because the one person that definitely knew that I have my exam was my husband. And I don't know what's going on in my head, but I didn't want to disappoint him. I didn't want to fail and take a second attempt. Even though my husband, logically, I knew he would not be disappointed with me just failing his second attempt, my first attempt, sorry, because he failed at his first attempt. That made it even worse, because I felt like, okay, then at least I want to be better than him and manage to get it right at my first attempt. So I already noticed how much pressure I put on myself when I did the theory test, even though no one knew about it, that I took that exam in October. And then for my driving exam, I also told not even my best friend that I had it scheduled. I just, my husband knew, and that was already enough pressure. So then I was so convinced a week before my driving exam that my appointment is on Wednesday, 3:20. That's the slot that I booked in. I have no clue what happened, but I was convinced it was the 5th of March, 3:20 p.m. Every time I have something scheduled with my husband where I need him or we need to go somewhere together, I put a calendar invite. I put that into, so that we get email reminders. I always put 24 hours. So to make sure that we are aware at least 24 hours, or next day we have an appointment where we need to be together. And yeah, so I'll do a lot of precautions always to make sure that we are all both on the same page. And then it was Sunday, the 2nd of March. And I remember we ran errands, and suddenly my email something popped up in my inbox. So I checked. I was like, why do I have a calendar invite for my driving exam? It's only on Wednesday. And even, like, I told my husband, like, I think the Saturday, the 1st of March, hey, on my drive exam on Wednesday, can we use Monday and Tuesday to drive a little bit more, so that I feel more confident. That was always my story. We need to feel more confident. My husband, like, you are already confident. You are a superb driver. What's going on with you? And I was like, yeah, but I don't know, blah, blah, blah. And I'm really a whiny pussy when it comes to such a thing. I don't know why this is, because I remember when I did my coaching certificates, when I did a lot of training for coaching modalities, I didn't give a darn whether I failed or not failed. I mean, I never failed anything per se. The last time I failed was an exam at in my university days. But even at university, I never bothered. The only reason when I bothered was because I was too lazy to study again. So I wanted to always make it the first round so that I don't have to study that shit again, and take that exam off my plate. But I was never, it's a different nervousness. It's a different freaking out. So I already noticed that, and it was like, oh, that is very peculiar. So back to that day. So it was Monday, and I was like, oh, cool, Monday. So I can use Monday and Tuesday to study a little bit more the different lanes, because the lanes have different kind of labeling and different kind of lines, that's, marking the lanes. Basically, there is a yellow line, white line. Then the lines can be, interrupted with shorter lines, longer lines, and all this stuff. So I just wanted to get familiar with the rules again, since it's been a while since I studied the books of driving in the US. And then at 12:10, I remember I was tired. I was like, oh, actually I need a nap. Corporate day was super busy, and I was like kind of tired from working a couple of hours. And I remember, and I was like, okay, cool. And then in the afternoon I started studying. And at 12:10, my husband sends me a text. When do we meet today? When is your exam today again? And then suddenly it hit me like a lightning bolt. I was like, shoot. Yesterday I got a reminder because the exam is today. Then I checked the confirmation when I booked in the exam, and of course I had it on this Monday, on the same day. I can't tell you how my heart beat. I was just about to freak the shit out. I was like, I have less than 2 hours to prepare. I have still to walk my dogs. I have so many things, like I wanted to dive into rules. So I scrambled for my phone, opened YouTube, and, typed in DMV. This is the Department of Motor Vehicle, where you take the exam, how to pass your DMV driver test and stuff. So I watched all the videos I could watch from driving instructor telling exactly what you have to pay attention to, how to make sure you're not failing, what are the most important rules, what are they asking you pre-driving as part of the exam, because I didn't know that. I didn't inform myself better. So they will ask you everything, like where are the brakes, where's the neutral gear, where, are your windshield wipers, and all this crap. And in a normal car, you have the buttons outside, like on the kind of in front next to the wheel. It's not hard to find all that stuff. And you have also stalks, you have the wheel, and then you have those stalks where you can just blink, and you can use the windshield wipers and do a lot of things from those stalks. But the new Tesla model doesn't have those stalks. So you basically have the wheel, and then you have the large screen in the middle. And with the screens, you do everything. And I was absolutely vivid. I was like, oh my God, I didn't know that they ask you those questions, So I told my husband, we need to leave early because you need to explain me all these functions, because I feel like I forgot everything you told me weeks ago. And I realized how nervous I was. And so we went to the DMV, and I was like, oh my God, and I started to become more nervous and more nervous. And then it is so funny. You go inside, you say that you're here, then you get some papers, and then you have to go back to the car, drive around the DMV. And it's so funny. It's like queuing for a fast food restaurant chain when you go for the drive-in. It's exactly the same. So like in front of us were 5 cars lining up to take that exam. And I knew I would have more time now. And I was like, okay, at least a little bit more time and a bit more of a breather. So I asked my husband again to show me all this, windshield wipers and all that stuff, because when I am nervous, I'm also not so much in my prefrontal cortex because my amygdala is firing too much and I tend to forget what he just explained. And the worst thing waiting is that I saw what's going on in front. So I saw the instructors or the examiners, I saw the students, like the people that get examined, the cars. So I saw a little bit of process and like how the examiner is going around the car. I was like, why is he going around the car? What is he checking? So I started to get really freaked out. And the last 20 minutes, we waited, I think 45 minutes, and the last 20 minutes were the worst ones because I was basically almost like the next car in line for taking the exam. And I did not cry, but I started to get hit by something really huge in my body. First of all, I had to go to the toilet and I had diarrhea. So, I mean, I know that you didn't want to know such details, but obviously my nervous system, and that's why I'm telling you this, was just absolutely dysregulated. And like diarrhea is a sign of of flight, of freeze, where the body just wants to get rid of your, and that's very normal that you have, for example, to pee a lot before exams or something, or when you're nervous you have to pee a lot. So it's the body where it just wants to prepare and wants to get rid of anything in the body that is not necessarily for survival or for running away from the saber-toothed tiger, which for me was obviously the examiner. So I was in the bathroom and I was like, I can't imagine like that I have to take this exam now. Like my body is just like, I mean, obviously I'm in the bathroom, and I need to get my shit together, like literally my shit together. I think that's where the expression comes from, to be honest with you. Oh, yeah. So, and I was close to tears, and I told my husband, I can't do this. I cannot do this. And he said to me, hey, if it's not a good day, don't worry. We can just go home. We just say we don't do it today and reschedule. He was so kind to me, and knowing that he's my back and he's not like asking me to push through or like saying, oh, everything will be fine. He was just saying very gently, okay, if it's not a day for you, then we can just go home. And that meant a lot to me. But of course, I'm also not someone who has then not the ability to have the courage to go through this. But I then started to really tell myself, okay, I need to coach myself through this. My inner child is absolutely dysregulating me. So, and then I really looked within and realized there was a big part in me that felt that this was so unfair, that I'm being judged as an adult and that someone has the ability to say, oh, I'm failing or I'm not, and I'm passing. And I know that sounds a little bit like, okay, what do you mean here? But I have this big thing from my childhood. So basically, when I was really slowing down and stop like yapping, oh my God, I can't do this, I will fail. When I stopped that and looked within and listened, what is the fuck going on? I realized there was this part that was so like afraid that due to some minor mistakes, or maybe it's heavy traffic, or I was driving also in an area that was unknown to me. It was a very busy area and it was in the midst of rush hour as well, that I would make mistakes and that it was just the wrong time and the wrong location for me to be, and then I fail. and then I have to redo it. And I didn't want to, like, and these are all minor things, but my thought process was, I don't want to disappoint my husband. And this was a huge ingrained thing. This came basically from me not wanting to disappoint my parents. No child wants to disappoint their parents. The thing is that our parents sometimes do and say things that are deeply hurtful, and we are trying even harder to please them. We're even trying harder to squeeze into their, how they want us to be. And I have a great relationship to my mom right now, and since a few years, because I have forgiven her a lot of those things. But when I grew up with a mother so her love language was to provide food for you, to wash you when you were still very dependent on your mom, to clothe you in clean, ironed clothes. But there was no affection, no physical. And listen, even me saying this, I get tears in my eyes and my throat is contracting, which means I'm speaking about something that is so deeply ingrained in my nervous system, and speaking about it triggers it. I can just feel this sadness in me. And this is still trauma that I'm processing, but it is really hard. And maybe you had that similar with one of your parents. My dad gave me lots of love. He was the one parent that always loved me, where I got also this physical and emotional validation and affection. But my dad was never home because he was working all the time. He was going on business trips. He was focusing on his career and providing for the family. And my mom had 4 children at home and a huge house to take care of. And my mom was not very happy. And now, being older, I understand why. I absolutely get it. There is no judgment. She did the best she could, and I'm forever grateful. But it's hard if you just don't get the love and the affection, and that's not even the worst. The worst was this constant criticism. So I got criticized for so many things, and as a child, you're not making everything perfect. Of course not. You're not supposed to. And I started to understand that whatever I try at home, it's never working, because my mom will never stop complaining about me, nitpicking on me. When I did something well, and you know how it is when you're a child and you do something really cool, maybe you had drawn up the perfect picture with your crayons, or you have you did a gymnastic exercise and in the garden, and you now can do a cartwheel, for example. And every time I came to my mom and said, I can do this really well. I'm really a superstar. This is what you do when you are very small. You don't mean to be arrogant. You don't even know what arrogance is when you're that young. You just don't know. You're just being yourself. You're happy. You accomplished something. And then my mom always put me down. She always said, like, don't go over your head. You're not that good. Like all those things, she's always putting me down, or she always said, like, don't be arrogant. And as a child, you're always fighting the most for the love of the person that you can get it from. And that was obviously my mom. And of course, today I know she deeply cared for me. She loved me in her own way. But it's just, it was a very cold environment to grow up in, and still something that deeply, triggers me. And I'm sharing this with you because there's no need to be ashamed of. There's no need of like, I'm this of age, or I'm a coach and I'm still haven't processed it. Well, I don't even know if I'm able to process this in my whole lifetime, Sometimes traumas take longer time to be processed. And the end result in healing a trauma is never to getting rid of the trauma. It's just to be able to speak about it and not be completely thrown off. So coming back to this driver license thingy, and when trauma kicks in right now in your life, and it might have occurred back like in your life in an age where you were not even able to speak or cognitively understand what's going on, it doesn't matter. It shows up in your day-to-day life so that, for me, I always see it as a sign to, oh, there's something to process, right? There is something that triggers you or triggers that trauma in an environment where it was never caused, right? So, I mean, getting so dysregulated before this driving exam, I mean, this was not trauma that just happened in that moment. It was unprocessed emotions and sensations that I felt from those big traumas back in my childhood, from those emotional traumas. Your fucking child's soul doesn't distinguish between a big trauma or a small trauma. Your children's soul, this little soul, doesn't understand something. It doesn't know how to cope with what's going on in the body. And it doesn't matter if it's a big or a small trauma. It's the same for the nervous system in the end of the day. So comparing traumas and saying people had it worse, yeah, of course, always. But that doesn't mean your trauma isn't valid. That doesn't mean your trauma is small and you should just be over it or just get your shit together, as I said before. So back to that. And that was the exact thing that came up for me. Like that this examiner that I don't know if it's an asshole, let's call it this, who has a bad day, who hates his job and then fails me because that's their pleasure. That's also the story that I told myself. So, and then I started to really calm down and knew what was going on. And it was so interesting in that moment. My husband said to me, you know what? That's trauma from your childhood coming up right now. And I'm like, wow, yeah, so true. Not that I didn't, like, I had that thought too, but out of a sudden he's saying that to me because I processed this within myself. I didn't speak anymore. Was for me also the clue that, wow, my husband just shared something with me that's like his observation, and he's not a psychologist. So it just confirmed basically what I felt came up for me. And I said, yeah, it's absolutely 100%. And, you know, when my mom was judging me a lot when I was small or nitpicking, complaining about me, I always felt this unfairness. I fought this internal sensation of this is so unfair. Because I knew as a child that a part in me knew very strongly that that is unfair and not just what my mom is doing with me. And that is where my inner rebellion comes also from. When I feel like someone is unfair, and that has nothing to do with me, when someone is unfair with me because they say bad things or judge me because of their own inner judgments, I always feel like, oh, that is not fair. I mean, of course, now I think a bit differently about it, but I have this strong sense of like, it is so unfair that someone is moody with me. My mom was also very moody, even though it's not my fault. And even if I made a mistake and my mom complained about it, does she need to complain about it every time? I'm just learning. I'm growing up. I'm eligible for making mistakes. So, and that was all like happening while I was coaching myself in front before it was my turn. And I started to pray to God. I helped him. I said, hey, I just need your support. Can you please send me an examiner that is kind to me, that can hold my fragility? Because right now I'm feeling fragile. I don't feel my confidence. And the problem is that when you have to do practical things, when you are judged, literally judged by practical things, by the action you take, obviously, your amygdala is in the fucking way. Because you can't focus. You don't focus on all these little things of like, okay, left turn. You need to look over your shoulders, about you in your mirrors. Oh, you need to blink. Oh, you need to stop. Oh, you know what I mean? There's so many things that you have to take care of, pay attention to. So it was really, really difficult for me. So I started to pray to God. I said, like, I have major trauma coming up. I'm at my worst at the moment. Please help me. Please send me a driving instructor that can hold me. I didn't pray for God to help me through this exam or to make me pass. I just prayed for someone who has mercy on me, because I was so afraid I would get someone like my mom, because I was in my trauma. That's why I was so afraid of someone being so judgmental and looking at all these mistakes I'm making and then saying, you're failing. So I felt better because I was praying, and I put this onto God's lap and said, okay, I need some support here. And then it was my turn. And then I saw the driving instructor coming, and he had a face mask on, which kind of like, half of his face was hidden, so I couldn't see his full face. And he was older. He was an older guy. He looked like an immigrant, if I may say so. So I was like, that helped a little bit. I was like, okay, he's an immigrant. Maybe that person has mercy on me. And then he wanted me to open the window, and then he introduced himself, and I just said to him, I'm sorry, I'm not at my best. I'm really freaking out right now. And I don't know, it's not my usual self, but I literally asked him to be kind to me. And I didn't, I usually I never asked anyone, like no teacher or anyone, to be merciful on me. But I was just like, I just told him, I was like literally composed. I didn't do it like this. Oh my God, be kind to me. I was composed, but I told him I was free. I just had a meltdown. I'm freaking out. So, and then he said to me, the same thing that everyone would tell you. Okay, don't worry. I saw that you've been driving before. You have a driver license since a long time. You can drive, and you know what? You need to calm down because it will not help you focusing and all this stuff. But he was very kind, and then he started to ask me to use, and then we started the exam, and then he started to ask me things about the car, to apply the blinker, the windshield wipers. Of course, I could not find the defrost of the windows because we never used it in California. I didn't know where it was on the Tesla, so I was looking for that for a very long time on the screen. It was actually hilarious. But yeah, he didn't mind that, I think. It wasn't too big of a big deal. And then, yeah, we started driving. And then when I was driving, and he was really kind and so, like, friendly to me, like his whole energy and demeanor was so supportive that I really could regulate my system, and then really started like driving in a more calm manner. I did fairly well, I have to say. We drove in an unfamiliar area with a lot of 4, 3, and 2 ways of stopping. We drove on big traffic lights. I drove for 20 minutes, which was a very long time. So this drive felt forever. Of course, I made a few big major mistakes, and you're allowed to have 3 big mistakes, and the 4th one will make you fail. So basically, he was so kind to me. He told me, hey, I'm an immigrant myself. So we talked. Even the good thing is that he talked a lot with me about things aside from driving. So sometimes I felt like he's a friend of mine and we are just driving around. That was on one hand good. On the other hand, it was difficult because I needed to focus and talk to him at the same time about unrelated things. So that was difficult, bearing in mind that I just had a major trauma coming up for me. And so that was a bit of what's difficult, and at least 1 or 2 major mistakes I made was because I didn't focus because I was focusing on what he was saying, like he was talking about his sister and about whatever. So that was distracting to me. So I'm not blaming him on this, but juggling talking while making sure you are not making any major mistakes is very hard. So, and he was so kind, and he told me the difference between Europe and America. And then he said, like, you know what, I will show you something. And then he started to bring me to a 4, 3, and 2-way stops and he really explained me the rules. He told me exactly how I approach things. I felt like, is he now my examiner or is it my instructor, driving instructor? So it was a bit of a mix, but he was still strict. So he wasn't like all cool and, like just explaining everything. He took really much of like attention on certain things, but the one thing that he told me in the beginning, before I even stepped foot in the car, was he told me, you will pass. I know that. And that I knew that he has so much grace that unless I make major mistakes, he will let me pass. And that was huge. So that person was sent by God. He was the best I could ask for. I made my mistakes. He told me about my mistakes after when we came back to the DMV in the parking lot. He explained me all the mistakes I made. He told me what I have to pay attention to. And he let me pass. He said I'm a superb driver. He's also told that my husband. And I could not have asked for anything better. And that helped me so much. Like, me passing meant the world to me. I feel I received my driving license yesterday. I lost my actual physical driver license. And I was so happy to receive it. It meant so much to me. And my husband was like, oh my God, you're so happy about a driving license. And I'm like, yeah, I am. It means so much to me. Because it's not about like the permission not to drive. We still have just one car, right? So it's like not that I can drive around every time of the day, still sharing a car with my husband until we move again and then we get a second car. But it just meant so much to me because of, the trauma that came up in the moment where I actually needed it the least, able to hold it and not bailing out, because my husband said to me, come on, we can reschedule, no worries, we can just not do it today. So I had the options to bail. I had the options just to like beat myself up. I have that also in me, that part that like beats me up and I'm like, fuck you and just get your shit together and what are you doing? Suppressing the trauma. But I let the trauma up. I helped myself while I had those sensations. And when those sensations from the trauma trigger you inside, when you feel like contractions, you feel like the emotions and your nervous system overboiling and taking the better of you, the moment that you can hold this human part of you without losing literally your shit, I mean, I did, but metaphorically speaking, that is, when you are calming yourself down, I really helped my inner child. I said, it's okay, we've got this. That's when I started to pray to God to ask for support. And then my child calmed down because I asked for support and I truly believe in God. Not sure about Jesus yet, but I'm believing in God. I believe in a God that is here when I need him. It's also the only person I allow myself to be judged. It's the only person I allow to judge me and then having their judgment count as something. Well, yeah, and that was the whole story. And I got my driver license yesterday. So yeah, that was the whole story. And I just wanted to share that with you because I think we are all used to hearing all those hero stories and a challenge, and then we manage to turn it around. But what does it mean when you're in the midst of a trauma that's coming up in a moment where you are supposed to focus, where you're supposed to like keep your contenance? And are you bailing then, or are you able to process it in that moment? And that was an important processing moment for me. And trauma doesn't come up in an environment where you sit at a couch sipping a cup of coffee and feel like I'm ready to process trauma. Of course not. It comes up in moments where you are truly challenged. And I'm immensely proud of myself that I managed to, first of all, regulate myself, calm myself down, praying to God, and God gifting me a driving examiner who has been that graceful with me. So I'm not ashamed that I'm crying about it or that whatever happened in my childhood. I had a relative good childhood still, even though I know exactly all the shit things that happened there. But no parent is perfect. I will not be a perfect parent. I have found peace with my mom in my early 20s. I let go of hating, judging her with a good relationship. She's a very good mom. And knowing what was going on between my parents, talking to one of my parents about it all openly, I now, of course, have a better understanding and context to why she was how she was. At the same time, also validating that it was a tough cookie to handle when I was a child. It's still a tough cookie to handle when I'm about to, get a driver license in. But I don't want to downplay things or trauma. I just want to take it as it is. It's just what happens. And I'm focusing on processing when it comes up. And yeah, it's not always looking pretty. It's not always the perfect hero story. But we are human beings and we are the opposite of perfection. We are here to be challenged so that we can grow and that we can heal. So I know it's been a long podcast episode today. I hope you enjoyed a very authentic and a very, personal story of mine. If you liked what you heard or you like the podcast in general, please leave a comment, subscribe to this podcast. It means the world to me. And I will sprinkle in more personal stories here and there so that, we get to know each other better, so that you see how I go about when, authentic things happen in my life. And yeah, I think that is also where we normalize what's going on in our lives when we see how other people are struggling or what's coming up for them, because we are usually very much, in our own bubble and thinking that only we are, like, I'm the only one struggling with this, or I'm the only one being shit scared of something, while other people have very similar struggles, challenges, and things coming up. So I want to definitely be part of that, sharing what's going on behind the scenes on my life so that I can share authentically, because that's what this whole podcast is about. So leave a review or comment. I always appreciate your support in that way. And until next time, my love. And yeah, thanks for being on this journey with me. I really appreciate that. Bye.